Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig. Reneda's conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez and I am an editor for Latimlist, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on latimlist.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Javier García, the Director of Corporate Venturing and Growth Capital at Femsa Ventures, the corporate venture capital fund of the public company Femsa. Femsa is a 130-year-old company that started off in the beverage industry, producing brands like Equis and Tecate, and has since diversified into other verticals and founded companies like Mexico's largest convenience store, OXXO, among others. They talk about Javier's transition from consulting to working at Femsa and learning about how corporate companies could get involved in the venture capital ecosystem. Javier also talks about his lessons learned in this experience and the importance of mitigating the misalignment in incentives and expectations between entrepreneurs and big corporations. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Javier García.
Hey, Javier, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Where are you in the world today?
Here in Monterrey, in Mexico, where our corporate headquarters are based, which is my hometown too.
Tell me a little bit about Femsa Ventures. What do you do?
Sure. So we are a corporate venture capital fund from Femsa, which is a public company listed in the New York Stock Exchange and also in the Mexican one. And it is a 130-year-old company that started as a brewery. You may know Dos Equis or Tecate as one of a few of the best brands that we produced. But we sold the brewery to Heineken in 2011. And we started adding some other businesses to the portfolio as a company. So we now operate a beverage arm, which is one of the largest independent bottlers for the Coca-Cola system. We operate in Latin America in 9 countries with the bottling operation. We're also a retail business. We have a convenience store chain in Mexico and 3 more countries that's called OXXO, and a few other small box retail businesses throughout Latin America, mainly in drugstores and gas stations, beauty stores, and restaurants. And our third business unit that we operate is kind of a B2B integrator of businesses like logistics, manufacturing, and plastic. Femsa Ventures within this corporate conglomerate is an initiative that started in 2018 with the mission to collaborate. We recognized that innovation was going to come from external sources in a more frequent and disruptive way, and we wanted to be a part of it, as I said, in the right way. So it took us a couple of years to think about how to do it and how to do it right. And we talked to pretty much everyone who would, give us an hour in the world who knew anything about corporate venturing. We did, I'm not kidding, 30 to 40 interviews to, try to learn from their perspectives. And the objectives were very similar. Everybody wanted a piece of the innovation pie in some way, shape, or form. But the how to do it was very difficult to pinpoint because there's no standard and there's like 50 ways of doing this the wrong way. So it took us a couple of years to figure out an operational design of how to do corporate venturing that, align with the way Femsa does business and the way Femsa interacts with ecosystems, and also what we wanted to achieve from it. And we launched in 2018, as I said, with the mission to collaborate. We are here to build collaboration exercises and opportunities between the best startups and our business platforms, recognizing that both sides need help in learning how to do so. And the existence of the fund is just an excuse. We also invest in those collaborations where we see the most potential. And we also invest in VC funds in the region as LPs to collaborate and get our hands dirty and get involved in the ecosystem. So we've been around for a couple of years. We started doing LP commitments so that we could learn from the best in the region. And we haven't stopped doing so, but sequentially, we began doing direct investments in 2019, and we've done 4 so far.
It's a really good overview of a very big operation. And just to give some context to people who haven't been to Latin America, beyond the beers that you've probably heard of, OXXO is just a phenomenon in the region. The convenience store on steroids. There's memes about it everywhere. It's just
it's the largest convenience store you've never heard of unless you've been to Mexico.
And if you've been to Mexico, you hear about it every 3 blocks.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. It's a machine. You know what? There's a funny story about OXXO, because if you look at it as if it was a startup, it was probably the worst startup in history, because it didn't make money for like 30 years. It started as an initiative from the brewery to maintain the rights to sell alcohol from their clients, which were mom and pops. So by the time they took a serious look at it, we were acquiring mom and pops at a rate that made us have enough of a size to consider it as a business platform on its own. And it took us a while to figure out the right value proposition. We focused a lot on proximity and what it means, what convenience means for our consumer in Mexico in particular. And last year we were opening 3 or 4 stores each day, about 1,300 stores per year. So yeah, it is a machine that has been very successful for a company, but it only was successful because people were patient with it. And, they believed that the value proposition was something that could generate value and resonate with what we think of the consumers. And right now it's one of our biggest business platforms.
We'll dig in more to the strategy and the history of Femsa Ventures in a couple minutes here, but I wanted to get into your background. So you said you're from Monterrey originally. Did you know that you wanted to be involved in the tech industry, or is this just something that came up in your business career?
I never knew what I wanted to be, and I still don't. I grew up in a small town here in the Monterrey metropolitan area, and I studied mechanical engineering because I wanted to work in the aerospace industry. And when I was in my senior year, I got invited by the sister of my best friend, who was older than him, to try out consulting, because she thought I would like it. And so I applied to the consulting firm where she was working for, which is Bain & Company at that time. And I got in and I said, well, I'll try this for a year or 2 to see what's going on. When I graduated, I did have another alternative, which was in the oil and gas industry, that I didn't like as much, but it was a good opportunity regardless. So I stayed at Bain for like 9 years. I did that from 2006 to 2014. And I loved it. What I found out about myself in that time was that I liked solving problems, and I liked not only thinking about the strategies and the alternatives and the scenarios, but also putting them in action and executing on the initiatives themselves and being accountable for them, which led me to move to Femsa, to basically try to be closer to the execution of the solutions. When I was a consultant, I loved calling my clients like 6 months after the fact or a year after the fact to find out what had happened, and to see if we missed something, or things change, or the things that we predicted actually happened. or the things that we recommended actually worked, because I was, left with that, sensation that we were leaving when the fun actually happened. So when I moved to Femsa, I joined corporate planning and corporate development in 2014, thinking that, being closer to the businesses and the operations and actually staying for longer than a few months in the same company would give me that type of accountability. And it did. Although most of the things that I did before we started Femsa Ventures were actually M&A stuff, which got me thinking about portfolios and transactions and ways to create value through integrations. But the things that I like more about M&A were the 100-day execution plans, right? So what happens after the transaction is signed, and how do you actually integrate? How do you actually capture synergies and think about becoming the thing that you planned it to be. So when we started thinking about corporate venturing, to be completely honest, they couldn't find anyone to agree to run it from the VC ecosystem. So I raised my hand and said, you know what, I've been thinking about it for a couple of years. Maybe if you're patient, I can learn the tricks of the trade through partnering with the best VCs that we can find and agree to have us as LPs and ask them to teach us. And that's what we did. So going back to your question, I never know what I want to do next. But I do know that what I want to be doing is precisely that, is learning and getting into things where we can think about not only strategy, but also execution.
One of the things that's been very interesting talking with you over the the last few times we've talked is in getting to know you better, is you have a humility to know what you know and what you don't know yet, and what needs to what you need to learn or want to learn, where many corporates don't. They try to jump in straight into the deep end and start right off the bat. How did you think about the investment strategy instead of just getting into the deep water right away and using that humility to kind of make the decisions from the beginning?
Sure. So I won't take credit for the ideas that were driving the design of what we did, because one of the things that I need to mention is that I read this great book that's called Masters in Corporate Venture Capital, that was written by a guy named Andrew Romans, who I think was a GP at a fund that was called Rubicon or something like that. And he did an amazing job at summarizing the do's and don'ts of, how should corporates get involved in the VC ecosystem. So I took a lot of ideas from that book. I actually called a guy and spent a day with him in Santa Monica talking about the potential implications of doing so in a more virgin type of market like Latin America, where corporates were not heavily involved in it yet. And we had this beautiful opportunity to begin doing things like this with all the 15, 20 years of learnings from the more developed ecosystems where corporates got involved in a way that they saw fit back then. So we learned from a lot of those mistakes that they made and the things that actually worked to design this operational way of working stuff. And you're completely right. It starts with humility. It starts by recognizing that corporates are not, actively thinking about how to do venture capital and how to engage with the entrepreneurial ecosystem from a perspective of learning. So I thought that being humble about recognizing the things that we don't know and the flaws that we have, and capitalizing on those, let's say, holes or gaps to try to develop additional capabilities that were not there, was an interesting way to take an approach to it. So I think I mentioned a few of those implications, but for example, one of the biggest things that we learned when we were researching corporate venturing was that there's a clear misalignment of incentives between the entrepreneurs and the big corporations with regards to what happens to the actual startup. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to have a strategic investor who will help you in many ways more than just giving you money, it may feel that in some way they're either down the road an acquirer or a competitor. Because you may be working, if you think about the strategy angle to it, you want to have a strategic investor that can actually, contribute to what you're doing and knows, what you're talking about and what industry you're working or what capability you're developing. So the probability of them being a competitor at some point is high. Or working in the same space, or working, targeting the same consumers, or developing a product that's similar to yours. You may even want to disrupt them. I mean, who's not solving for OXXO in fintech, for example? So you have to be very careful when you're engaging with a startup from a corporate perspective, to recognize that there's not the same level of alignment with a corporate investor than it is with a purely financial traditional VC fund. So the ways we can mitigate that type of risk of misalignment is, in our mind, was, let's just not lead deals. Let's not write term sheets or determine valuations, and let's have the financial VCs who are perfectly aligned with the entrepreneurs determine all of that and participate in syndicates as a follower investor, as a co-lead maybe, where we're not, falling to the temptation of, writing things in the term sheet that may not be beneficial for the startup, even if we wanted to. So that's one of the things that we decided early on was, let's just not lead deals, let's not write term sheets, and let's have the guys who know how to do this the right way, do all that work and negotiate everything with the entrepreneur, and only participate in those rounds and syndicates where we're both convinced that the corporate can actually contribute to the growth story of the entrepreneur. And to be honest, that was that generated two things. First, it gave us high moral grounds to when we were in conversations with the entrepreneurs very early on, to get rid of that type of fear or risk from the good entrepreneurs who recognize that there may be some conflict, by saying, hey, you know what, I won't determine valuation, I won't write any term sheets, so get a lead investor and we'll form part of the syndicate only if we're both convinced that we can contribute to your story. And also, on the negative side from our end, we miss on some opportunities to get into deals because we get to know a good startup, but they don't have a lead investor or a term sheet in place, and we just can't do that because we will lose that right to defend ourselves when we're criticized. If we're criticized about not engaging in the right way. But that's not the only thing that we did. As I said earlier, we also decided to, for the first year of our existence, recognizing that neither of us had VC experience, all we did was invest as LPs with the funds that would take us. The funds that we respected would take us with a few interesting conditions that we thought were beneficial for all parties, in which we asked, for example, to participate in their investment committees as silent observers to learn. We asked to look at the deal flow that they say no to, because we might look at it from a collaboration standpoint without even needing to invest in those companies. And we also asked them to participate in our discussions of deal flow when we get opportunities from the business units. So we have been partnering with the VCs of the region, either through LP commitments or just co-investing with them. in a very interesting way, because they see us as, once they get to know us, they see us as great co-investors and collaborators, and they don't see us as a threat. There's still work to be done there. I do think that as we grow as a type of player, and as more corporates, start dedicating teams and thinking to ways to getting involved in this ecosystem, the entrepreneurs and the VC firms will evolve in the way they think about us, in a positive way, to recognize that we can be an interesting player as a type of of incumbent, where collaboration means more than bringing in capital and bringing in connections. The great thing about corporate venturing is that you actually have business platforms that can be incredible fields of testing and piloting solutions very early on, if done correctly, right? So I would say we in our team at Femsa Ventures, we spend a disproportionate amount of time helping our business units learn how to get engaged with startups and with entrepreneurs, and also helping entrepreneurs refine their collaboration pitches, if it's a commercial agreement or if it's just a partnership. We dedicate a lot of time to help the entrepreneurs who would take our opinion to it, to improve their pitches, knowing what we know from our operations, at least, and what resonates with the decision makers at the business unit level. And we get very excited when those collaborations happen, even if we're not able or interested in investing from a financial perspective. As I said, we may have fewer than 10 investments in a couple of years, but we're also monitoring the number of collaboration exercises that we have been doing between the business units and the entrepreneurs, and we're at the number is between 30 and 40 right now. I don't have the exact number, but we're collaborating way more than we're investing, and that's the right in my mind, that's the right way to do this. Eventually, some of those collaborations may end up being portfolio companies or not, if we don't convince ourselves that the remaining value to be created is significant enough for us to deserve a place in the cap table. But we get, I would say, even more excited about the collaboration exercises and what we can learn from them, both the entrepreneur and the businesses, and having that as a, let's say, proprietary deal flow for our investment operations, which is probably 20 or 30% of the time that we spend on it.
So one of the things that's probably hardest for an early stage entrepreneur is to understand how to work with a big company. If they're trying to get their first couple of clients, what are some of the biggest recommendations that you have for the founders of a company when they want to come work with a big company?
Well, all of the things I'm going to say in retrospect are very obvious, but you would be surprised as to how much people ignore this. The first one I would say is, think about what you want to do with the corporation. It sounds really logical, and trust me, first question I always ask new entrepreneurs I meet is, tell me your story. And then the second one is, what do you want to do with Femsa? And most of the time, they don't have a clear answer to that. And the reason for that being is that they get confused when they talk to a corporate venture arm, because they think that they're pitching for a capital contribution. They're pitching to an investor. But what I would recommend is that think of them as as a collaborator first and investor second. So so the first recommendation I would say is think about what you want to do with that particular company, and the more specific you can tell that story, the better. Let me give you an example. If you're an online supermarket and you want to collaborate with Femsa, one of the things that you can do is say, hey, you know what? I want to learn from you to understand how you run your distribution centers for your retail operation, or I want to understand how you think about customer segmentation, or I want to be your supplier of this particular products in this particular region because I think that you can get better deals from me than from somebody else. Or I want to try out with, in this particular city, I don't know, with 100 stores of yours to sell this particular product that I am developing that nobody else has. So be aggressive in the design of the things that you want the collaborations to get to, and be specific, because from my end, when I listen to a pitch that's well thought of in terms of the collaboration exercise that they want to try and how that helps their growth story, I can very easily pinpoint internally who the best decision maker is for them to listen to this pitch. So it saves us a lot of time and energy in figuring out, what type of things you want to do. So that's one. And then the second one would be to wait until it's the right time for you to do, to try to pursue an engagement. Sometimes, as I said earlier, you come up with a new fintech startup, and the first thing that you think about when you're thinking about long-term is, I want to be in, I don't know, 20,000 locations, so I want to work with OXXO. And you come talk to us, and if we were to say yes immediately, you wouldn't be ready. So you need to at least go, maybe big corporations shouldn't be your client number 3 or 4 or 5. Maybe they should be your client number 15 or 20. Because sometimes that big of a scale may be too much for an entrepreneur to start tackling. And people tend to overestimate the resources that are required and the energy that is required to grow at a scale that is too much for them. So think about the right timing is my recommendation number 2. And then number 3 is be careful about missing an opportunity of a great potential collaboration by not speaking with the right person. We see a lot of startups that come our way and say, you know what, we tried it and we had this conversation with this person at this particular business unit and didn't work. And the diagnostic is always, that wasn't the right person to talk to. And it's bad that they decided to reach out to that particular person, because maybe if they had the opportunity to talk to the right decision maker, the result would have been completely different. And that's how dedicated arms of corporate venturing like ourselves can help a lot. We very quickly, one of the things that we have to do right is get you in front of the right decision maker for your first pitch, for your first interaction, so that you don't lose an opportunity and disregard a company just because you didn't speak with the right person.
So flipping that question around to your experience working inside of a company, what advice do you give other companies, or what lessons have you learned to help companies work with startups? Because startups are founded by founders who are generally special people, so maybe not as experienced. What advice do you give to the companies to be successful with founders?
I think that for the most part, I have been experiencing a shift in the thinking process of many corporations. I can't say all of them, but many of them are starting to recognize that, for the first time in history, technology and the best innovation is going to come from outside of their premises. So if any corporation does not have this thought in their radar, they should. The way to get involved, to be honest, I'm not completely sure that the way we're doing it is the right way. We will know probably 10 to 15 years from now. Once, if we stick to it and adapt it, the results are not in the short term. But what I do know is that companies, every type of company that's been successful in whatever field they're in, needs to recognize that disruption is, around the corner, and technology the access of technology has never been as open and as easy as it is today. So recognizing that, needs to lead to taking some steps into participating in any way that they see fit. My recommendation for those that are considering doing corporate venturing in a more serious way is that they should talk to us, talk to everybody who's doing what we're doing, can and will share their stories and their experiences and their do's and don'ts, so that the initiative actually has a potential to provide results. In my mind, I think that if we approach this problem, if you may, quote unquote, with the openness of recognizing that big companies are not always going to have the best possible answer to anything, and we have an openness to recognizing that we may be better off by collaborating with other companies that are younger and smaller and more nimble, but also more agile, great things can start happening. You will have to battle a lot of resistance internally, and you will have to think of yourself as an agent of change, where most of the time you're going to be facing people who feel threatened by you internally, threatened by what you are trying to do, because it implies changing the way that they've been thinking about stuff and doing stuff. But the law of small numbers applies here. You bring stuff with enough persistence and with big enough numbers until you find the right fit, and people start recognizing the value of collaboration with the entrepreneurs. And everybody benefits. To be honest, those exercises, you can never go wrong, because even if they don't meet the target results that initially were thought of, there's a lot of learning, and you learn fast, and you learn small, and you learn cheap, and you also learn in a very high volumes once you start opening your business platforms for collaboration. I can think of capitalizing today that were not in our radar before we started getting involved in a more proactive way. I don't think that corporate venturing is necessarily a pipeline for new big business platforms or even for M&A. I'm not convinced of that yet, and I may never be. But and I also don't think that corporate venturing is neither the most important nor the only tool for innovation, for external innovation. But it definitely is one that you can use and that you can have in your toolbox, where opening up, recognizing the value of doing so, and actually focusing on the learnings that you can potentially generate and the value that you can create, it's actually something worth doing. I would say that the recommendation is to, you know, spend an hour or two with each of us. You will find that the openness to collaborate and tell our stories is high. Even if, you know, the mothership is a competitor of yours, you will still find that they will be very willing to tell you their stories and give you tips and advice. And to be honest, the more the merrier. I think that we may be reaching or have already reached a tipping point there where a good number of corporates are starting to notice this and get involved and ask questions and do at least create a pitch to their boards or their executive teams to start thinking about this. And we may see an interesting phenomenon where this can become more mainstream.
If you could go back to when you were first starting with Femsa Ventures, knowing everything you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a very interesting question. I would say that my recommendation to myself back then, a couple of years from now, would be to feel comfortable with the uncertainty that this is generating. For me, this was a career switch. I mean, being a consultant and then a corporate planner was pretty much the same thing for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And taking on this role came with a lot of uncertainty as to, you know, how to do this, and, you know, what type of capabilities do I and my team need to develop, and, you know, what are we pursuing? I would recommend to trust the process and to also trust the instinct of recognizing that there's a whole new world there of learning that's going to be very exciting. So I can see now me being in this space for the rest of my career without ever having to stop learning. The people who know how to do this never stop. So this is potentially a space where I can spend the rest of my professional career, and I'll be very happy to do so if that's the case. But because it has all the elements that I think are appealing to me: problem solving, strategizing, investing, and, you know, evaluating returns and being close to, you know, where the fun happens. So just trust the process and continue to learn.
Do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, or documentaries you like, whether about startups or just life in general?
Yeah, sure. I mentioned this book by Andrew Romans, which is a must read for everybody who's been given the responsibility to take a look at corporate venturing. I also recommend a book that's called Corporate Venturing that was written later, I would say, for my timing, a couple of years later than what I wish would happen, from James Mawson, who runs Global Corporate Venturing, which is a great initiative to kind of create unified organization globally for all corporates that are doing corporate venturing. So those two books, Masters in Corporate Venture Capital and Corporate Venturing, are must reads if anyone's trying to understand how corporates should get involved in the ecosystem, whether if you're a VC fund or entrepreneur. Those will give you a lot of perspective. And also, if you're a strategy person in a corporation that's thinking about it, this is also very good. It's a very good tool. And for life in general, there's just too many. I'm obsessed with sci-fi. You know, a few days ago, I found out that one of my favorite sci-fi books is going to come to Netflix, and the people who are going to do it are the writers and producers of Game of Thrones. So it's pretty exciting. The first book is called The Three-Body Problem, and it's Chinese. It's Chinese sci-fi. It's really, really amazing. But that's just if you like sci-fi.
We're huge fans of Three-Body Problem and the series in Magma. We have debates about that all the time, and this was a big topic of conversation in our WhatsApp group the other day when it came out. So we're super excited for it too.
Yeah, so I got criticized about it because nobody would agree to read it in my team. So I'm happy there's more fandom out there. So I like everything sci-fi, and I'm kind of a geek in that space. But personal growth books. The last one that I read was Atomic Habits. It's a short book. It's interesting. It's very practical. I don't pretend to be a source of recommendations for things. I just pick whatever the AI system from Amazon recommends and see what happens. But those two books I liked a lot. Atomic Habits and the trilogy of Three Body Problem and The Dark Forest and Dead Sand.
Yeah, you should listen to the episode with our team member, Matt Gutierrez, because he has a whole theory about development of Mexico with positive visions of sci-fi. So he has a whole theory around what if in sci-fi books it was tequila and tacos rather than whiskey and pizza, and how that would change the vision of people, both in Mexico, but then also for the world and the different cultures.
That's interesting. I'll take a look at that. In preparing for this podcast, I was listening to a few of the episodes that you recorded, so I'll try to find that one out too.
What's next for Femsa Ventures over the next year or two?
I think that the experience curve is reaching a point where we're way more comfortable with the interactions that we're having and the processes that we're building. And so I would expect that the number of collaboration exercises is going to exponentially grow. So we may be thinking about 100 and plus pilots over the next 18 months, which is exciting. Because right now I don't even need to pitch them anymore. With the people who have done 3 or 4 in a row, they go out and do it on their own, and they just send us the summary of learnings and the format that we use for monitoring those. So it's getting to a point where it has a life on its own, and we in my mind, I would assume that we're gonna raise, if you're gonna use that expression, Femsa Ventures 2, we're gonna pitch it to our board over the next 18 months too. So we'll renovate our fund. We're gonna allocate the initial capital that we're given in about 10 or 15 companies. So maybe 8 to 10 more than what we have right now. And we'll continue to get involved and participate in conversations in any level where external innovation and open innovation becomes relevant. I'm very excited about what's happening in a few of the spaces at Femsa where collaboration is almost mandatory. Fintech is one of them. I would say e-commerce is another one, and advanced analytics might be the third one. Towards commercial optimization and marketing optimization. So I know we're late in the game as a company, but we're making the right steps and getting closer to where I would feel comfortable in terms of the level of engagement that we have with technology innovation and the ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, it's going to be fun to watch as you guys continue to invest and support the ecosystem. Thanks for taking the time to do the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoy this, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest Javier García, and thank you to Angela Andreca for producing this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.